Thanks for downloading this podcast from Radio Kerry. For more, go to radiokerry.ie/podcasts or search iTunes using the keyword Radio Kerry.
You might remember over the last couple of weeks we've been dealing with the story of proposals to move some of the 78, if not all of the 78 residents from the St Mary of the Angels campus in Beaufort, which is run by St John of God Services here in Kerry. A parents group has formed to oppose the plan. They have been talking with both the HSE and St John of God's over the last couple of weeks or so to try and work out a resolution to this situation. Well, with me here in studio to talk about this is General Manager of St John of God's Services, Kerry. That's Claire O'Dwyer. Claire, good morning to you.
Good morning, Jerry.
Thanks for talking to us this morning.
Thank you, Jerry.
Can you outline, first of all, I suppose, the position as things stand from the point of view of what we've heard over the last couple of weeks, the unhappiness and unsatisfaction of the parents, but the position of your organisation with regards to what the HSE wants you to do with transitioning these residents?
Okay, well, good morning, Jerry, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come in and meet with yourself this morning and indeed speak to the wider community of Kerry. Jerry, if I can start by saying the situation in St Mary of the Angels has been like a runaway train. St Mary of the Angels is not closing. We've spent the last 2 weeks speaking with families to reassure them of this, listening to their concerns and fears, and indeed families, as you've mentioned, that are very upset and very angry. And I suppose the one thing that has come, the very positive thing that has come out, is the fantastic way families speak so highly of St Mary of the Angels, and we're very, very grateful for this. I want to reassure people that there is no alternative plans for the future use of the site in St Mary of the Angels. St John of God's have been in Kerry for the last 36 years, Jerry. St Mary of the Angels amalgamated with St John of God's 11 years ago. And judging by the support we have received, I'm pretty sure we're going to be around for at least another 36 years. I want to apologise for our poor communication in relation to all of this. It is a complex issue, but unfortunately we haven't handled it well. And, you know, we have been spending the last 2 weeks trying to reassure families that the service is not closing, St Mary of the Angels is not closing, and, you know, that this really is all about giving people options. Now, if I can talk a little bit about the development plan, Jerry.
Sure.
That has been mentioned a lot in recent media coverage. And I suppose the development plan is in relation to what we've heard of congregated settings. And a congregated setting is where you have more than 10 people in a particular facility, in a residential facility. And for us, and indeed for other services right across Ireland, we were requested by the HSE to take stock and look that if we were to move at what is now 77 people from the campus of St Mary of the Angels into the community, what would that take? How many houses would it require? How many staff would it require? What would be the geographical locations? It's not an action plan, Jerry, and I suppose that was the remit of us to really communicate that better to families, and that's why I'm here this morning, to explain that, to apologise for any upset that we have caused, and to reassure people that St Mary of the Angels is here for quite a while yet, and indeed any communication, any changes or moves will be done with the family members, with the resident themselves, with their advocates and the people that know them best.
Okay, all right. Along those lines, you're talking there about the report that was done up in relation to where things need to go. And this is national policy. This isn't an idea that was dreamt up or formulated by St John of God's in terms of moving people from, as the saying is, congregated settings or really institutions, and moving them into the community so they can integrate in the community and live there from that point of view. But from the point of view of what was proposed in this plan from St John of God's, and the report talks about community living transition plans, which include the person-centred support intensity scale, clinical assessments, environmental assessments for individuals. The next step will be the collation of this data, which will in turn advise who people want to live with and the environs and locations where they will live. This person-centred data will ground the information already collated on the accommodation requirements of residents contained within the plan. This information from the community living transition plans will form an action plan. An implementation team will be set up, the purpose of which will be to oversee the implementation of the actions and any additional actions required to ensure the completion of same. So basically, look, we're gathering information, we're going to be finding out, we're putting the resident at the centre of it all. How did that plan go from there? That was just from the conclusion of the plan drawn up by the HC in St. John of God's. How did that go from there to angry parents feeling they were blindsided and a lack of information?
Yeah, and it's a fair point. You know, Jerry, I suppose, as I've mentioned earlier, our communication has not been good in this, the development plan was put together over a 2-year period. It was a conceptual document, or indeed, a sense of what would it take. It involved members of the Kerry County Council, the HSE, St. John of God's, and indeed some representatives from parents. And I suppose it was grounded in, Jerry, we over the years we have adopted a person-centred planning approach, and, the document would be grounded in that knowledge and information that we would have gleaned from families and, and indeed their advocates and people that know them best. I suppose, Jerry, in a sense, the document and the development plan that we have now, it has been very, very positive for the Kerry services and indeed for St. Mary of the Angels, because it did highlight, some deficiencies. And that has in fact given us leverage to get buildings upgraded. There was fire compliance issues, particularly in two particular locations in on the campus, and that gave us leverage to ascertain some additional financial monies from the HSE, and we work very, very closely with the HSE. And over the last year and a half we have been working with families, because some of their family members would have been moved out of the campus in order to for the works to be completed. So I suppose that has actually very much brought it along. But as I said already, Jerry, this I suppose it is a point in time document, and quite frankly, our communication wasn't good. We've learned from that. And since, as I say, for the last 2 weeks, we've been meeting with family members. We've contacted the 77 families. We met with a very, very good and constructive 3-hour meeting with the newly formed family representative group. We have a meeting indeed. We're writing out to families, arranging another meeting next Monday with families to follow up on the meeting that took place, the family forum meeting that took place on the 18th of September. And I suppose we see this as really exciting, in fact, because, this opportunity this has afforded us, the message has been very, very strong for the last couple of weeks. There's fantastic support for St. Mary of the Angels.
Sure, and with that in mind, and I know you're talking about you plan to stay here for another 36 years, but the logical question, and again, it wasn't your plan to move them out. This is national policy as put in by the HSE, and you're acquiescing with that because your funding comes from the HSE. What happens to St. Mary of the Angels if all 77 residents move out? What will happen to it? Okay. That's the central question.
Yeah, it certainly is, Jerry. And I suppose the reality is this. The Time to Move On document was put together in 2011 with a view that all congregated settings I've mentioned earlier from residential locations of more than 10 would be closed by 2017. That's next year. The government has committed, in fact the Minister spoke last week in the Dáil in relation to this matter, and he outlined a commitment that 900 people will be moved from decongregated settings right across Ireland.
He's sticking with the plan. This is a plan. It's going ahead. It's not going to change, was the line from the Minister. But the question still remains the same. Once the 77 residents, however long that takes, whatever the timeline is, what will happen? The grounds will be empty for their purpose.
If I can come back to that, but just to finish my point, there's 900 people. The commitment has been given between now and 2021, there's over 2,200 people right across Ireland in congregated settings, Jerry. And I suppose for us, really, our commitment is this. We recognise the fantastic facilities that are in St Mary of the Angels. We have a hydrotherapy pool. The people that attend St Mary of the Angels and live there have access to a plethora of multidisciplinary supports and therapeutic supports. And I will absolutely assure you, Jerry, that there will be no person moving from the campus of St Mary of the Angels unless life is better for them and unless those supports are still there. We have the school based in the campus of St Mary of the Angels. The school is staying there. In fact, last year, Jerry, we extended the school, and a fantastic, endorsement, I suppose, of the school. And, we have a lot of good facilities on the campus. But, Jerry, I will stand before anyone and tell you that the community living is a very, very positive thing. We support people here, Jerry, with complex needs.
And we'll get into that, Claire. We need to take a quick break. But again, if you could answer that question for me, is there a plan in place, or is it something that you're waiting to see what happens, however long it takes for the residents to move, for the use of the land that is there, that was given to the Order of the Nuns and amalgamated into St John of God's by a family? What happens to that land down the line?
I can assure you, Jerry, that there is no alternative plans for the future use of St Mary of the Angels site. And St John of God's are absolutely committed that site into the future will be there for the people of Kerry and will be there for people with disabilities in Kerry.
Okay, that's a commitment that St John of God's, it'll be used in some manner or form for people with disabilities.
Absolutely.
Similar to along the lines of what it's being used for today.
Absolutely.
We're speaking with General Manager of St John of God's Services in Kerry, Claire O'Dwyer, about the plan to move residents from St Mary of the Angels, which has generated some controversy, as you will have known if you've been following the story for the last couple of weeks. Claire, I just want to ask you one question. A couple of comments are coming in here as well. Donald gets in touch. 2 questions for Claire. When was the last resident admitted, and will there be new clients admitted in the future? Asked Donald. I'd imagine the answer is no to that if you are moving residents out.
Absolutely. The last resident was admitted to the campus 4 years ago, and I suppose it is a national agenda that no new people would be admitted into a congregated setting, or indeed, as you mentioned earlier, as it might be deemed an institution.
Okay, and on that point, for parents out there who do not see this as institution in the minds of people who would think of institutions, they think enormous grey buildings from the 1800s where people are put in large wards. They see the campus as fantastic. Mm-hmm. What about that this isn't just another institution?
And I would agree. I certainly would endorse that view. We're very, very proud of the service that we have in St Mary of the Angels. Frontline staff and management have worked really, really hard over the years to improve the campus and, I suppose, maximise the potential for the residents in St Mary of the Angels. However, Jerry, I suppose it is important to note that, we've had HICWA into us 2 years ago, and the reports, there was positives and negatives as with all. We've worked on that. They've come back during the summer and they've conducted an unannounced inspection, and for some of our areas it's been very, very positive. But they've also highlighted, in fact,
there have been fire safety issues in some of the areas. Well,
indeed, Jerry, and thankfully those have now been addressed. So I'm very, very pleased to advise everybody of that certainly we are compliant from a fire perspective. However, Jerry, we have a report coming out this week from HICWA, which is very concerning. The reality for some of the men and women living in St Mary of the Angels is there are privacy issues. There are people in overcrowded situations. We have bungalows where we have 3 bungalows with 22 people. We have another 2 bungalows with 13 people. And, and there are concerns in terms of what's happening during the day. But those are things, Jerry, can I assure you, those are things that we're working really, really hard on improving. And I suppose we have a track record right across the county. Indeed, our services out in Listowel, you might have noted in the paper last week, achieved 18 out of 18 outcomes for people with a profile similar to the people in St Mary of the Angels. So we're very, very proud. We know what needs to be done.
One of the suggestions from the parents group is why not get funding from the HSE, from other organisations, to enable the people who are in St Mary of the Angels to stay there. Break up the campus area into the houses with 4 residents per house, keep them on site where they're used to having been. Put the funding into that instead of scattering them across the county of Kerry. Was that considered, or is it an option?
Well, I suppose, Jerry, certainly from the national agenda's perspective, developing on the site of St Mary of the Angels isn't one. And I suppose, Jerry, for a good reason. To be fair, living in the community, it does generate a lot of fear for people, but as I've mentioned earlier, we have the expertise. We know how that can be done. But
Is it your contention so that splitting them up into houses that are on the campus would be the same as a congregated setting? That if you reduced it to 4 people per house, per new house, purpose-built house, that still wouldn't work in terms of this national policy?
Well, I suppose, to be honest with you, Jerry, for the last number of years we have been doing that. In fact, the report that you mentioned earlier made reference to the two of our units, St Fidelis's and St Brendan's. As an example, St Fidelis's had 12 people living when that report was being completed in that particular unit in dormitory-style accommodation. We have looked to moving those 2 of those individuals across into those houses, and we're constantly looking at creative ways that we can improve the existing living conditions of the people in St Mary of the Angels.
Okay, but it's going to be residents moving out, not using the site as it exists.
We need to maximise our facilities, there's no question of that. In terms of developing on the site, certainly that's not the national agenda, but indeed we are enhancing and developing the existing facilities, and that is our absolute priority.
Another point that was made, and it's a question probably again for yourselves as well as the HSE, why not allow the residents live out the rest of their lives here? Don't accept any new residents in, allow them to live out the rest of their lives where their family are used to, where they're used to, and phase it out that way rather than moving them into the community. Well, these are profoundly disabled, some of them individuals, and change is something that they do not deal well with. And the argument from the parents group is this national policy is fine for people with varying levels of disabilities who can handle being in the community and respond well to being in the community. But the fear from the parents is our children are too disabled to handle that sort of a change.
And I appreciate, that certainly people living in the community, it does generate fear. And I suppose if we've learned anything from the last couple of weeks, Jerry, is that, and we need to sit down, we need to communicate with people, we need to do more of that. The reality is, though, Jerry, we have the experience of supporting people with a similar profile living in the community.
And has it worked?
Absolutely. And as I've mentioned earlier, we have right across the county in our services, residential services in Tralee and in Listowel, we have achieved excellent results in supporting those people in enhancing their lives, and HICWA have endorsed that.
Okay. Have you got a guarantee of funding and staffing levels that these people will need if they do move to these new areas?
Well, I suppose, Jerry, I'm glad you brought that point up, because indeed, for the last, number of years, we've been working as no more than any other disability service in Ireland. We've had a lot of service cuts and a lot of budgetary cuts. But the HSE have been working very, very closely with us to try and build that back up. And indeed, a number of staff were put into the campus in St Mary of the Angels. So, it's really, really important for the message to get across today, Jerry, that, we see that as an absolute priority to maintain the standards. In relation to moving people out, the reality is, Jerry, that is the only show in town from a congregated settings perspective. And, from...
will it be supported by funding? Or will parents in 4 or 5 years down the line see cutbacks to their family members living in these decongregated settings, that they won't be getting the staffing levels that they need, and some future government will say, sorry, the money isn't there anymore?
Well, I suppose, Jerry, that's the one thing about St John of God, St Kerry and St Mary of the Angels. We will fight tooth and nail to make sure that services are maintained for people. We will not compromise. And, I suppose we have secured at the start of the year monies to buy what we call capital monies, or, to buy housing, to buy one house, basically. And, and we are working very hard with the HSE now to see, because as I said already, we have a HICWA report, we have overcrowding, an overcrowding situation,
okay.
But of course, Jerry, it's important to remember as well that we, I suppose, as I've mentioned already, no person has moved from St Mary of the Angels yet under the decongregation model, okay? If people move, and when they move, it will be with the staff that know them best. And I think that's a really, really important message, because change, of course, is very difficult for the people we support, but the people that know them best are the people that will be going with them and supporting them into the future in the community.
That housing idea, and it's not an easy thing to get housing anywhere in Kerry at the moment. We're in the teeth of one of the worst housing crises we've ever had in the county, in the country. Will you be building purpose-built houses? Will you be buying houses? Will you be renting houses and retrofitting them? Or are all three on the table?
Well, certainly in relation to the decongregation model, and we have this experience right across the country, the option of renting is not a good option because it's not a sustainable one. So, I mean, from our point of view, it is the reality as well is that, particular to people with severe to profound intellectual disability, they will require purpose-built buildings and accommodation. And we know that, you know, indeed, some of the buildings that we already have in St Mary of the Angels. So they will have to be built, and indeed, you know, varying types of funding streams, you know, be it through capital assistance or indeed, you know, HSE monies that are made available. Okay,
a question that I wanted to get to. You mentioned about the school, St Francis School, and the extension being built last year. On this action plan, there was short-term, medium-term and long-term action plan points. And point 12, the School Board of Management to develop plans with regards to move off campus. Now, I know this plan was done up 2 years ago. I know the extension was put onto St Francis School last year. Did St John of God's at any stage want St Francis to move off-site? That seems like it did. This is an action plan. This is what we're going to tell the Board of Management to do. They're going to move.
Well, certainly.
Or has that now changed?
Well, certainly, Jerry. You know, as I mentioned at the outset, the development plan was something that was a requirement of us to do a stock take in terms of if we were to meet the requirements of time to move on from congregated settings, what would that look like? And of course, if the 77 people were to decongregate into the community, of course, then the school would have to be taken into account. And that's the reason that was factored in there. As you've mentioned already, you know, the school is thriving. You know, we're very, very proud of St Francis Special School, and I know Liam and all of the staff there are very, very proud of it. And certainly into the future, in fact, I think their plans are to extend as opposed to anything else.
So they'll be staying on site now. Whatever the report had said for them, that's now changed, and St Francis will be on this site for the long term. And
indeed, for a lot of the residents in St Mary of the Angels, Jerry, you know, that's the really, really important message to remember here, is that St Mary of the Angels is not closing. Okay. We have an absolute commitment to those residents and their families.
Sure.
We have a lot of...
Just can I be clear, the school will be staying there for the long-term future?
Yes, certainly.
Okay, and the residents there'll be some future use of the property for people with disabilities, not residential, but maybe others.
Well, certainly, as I've mentioned already, we have no alternative plans for St Mary of the Angels. We have people that live there and are very, very happy there. Okay. And this will be an incremental thing. In terms
of timeline, just finally, we are running short time, and I appreciate you giving so much time this morning. In terms of a timeline, it was meant to be done by 2017. Will it be longer than that now, or are you still working to that timeline?
Absolutely. It will be a lot longer than that. As I've said already, you know, St John of God's have been here in Kerry for the last 36 years. We can be certainly there for a lot longer. We see community living as a very positive thing. We will be sitting and meeting with families. We will be consulting with families. We recognise the importance and the wonderful facilities that are in St Mary of the Angels. And, you know, and can I just say that any concerns that people might have, please contact us. We'd be only delighted to hear from them. We do have that family meeting happening next Monday afternoon. We will be writing to families, and of course we will be giving individuals the options, and that's really, really the important message from this morning, Jerry.
Okay, Claire O'Dwyer of St John of God Services in Kerry, thanks very much for talking to us this morning.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from Radio Kerry. For more, go to radiokerry.ie/podcasts or search iTunes using the keyword Radio Kerry.